did interfere in our election. It was the Russians who hacked into the DNC and stole the Clinton emails, and the Russians were up to no good. That is not the bone of contention with me. What happened during Crossfire Hurricane is very much a concern of mine. So on January the 4th, 2017, we now know that the FBI agents who were investigating General Flynn as part of a counterintelligence investigation had recommended that General Flynn be dropped from the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. The Crossfire Hurricane team determined that Crossfire Razor, Flynn investigation, was no longer a viable candidate as part of the larger Crossfire Hurricane umbrella case. A review of logical databases did not yield any information on which to predicate further investigative efforts. Now, this is on January the 4th, 2017, where the FBI was recommendation through a memo to drop General Flynn from the counterintelligence investigation called Crossfire Hurricane. We now know that Peter Strzok told Mr. Barnett, wait a minute, the 7th floor at the FBI wants to keep this thing going. What happened next? A January 5th meeting in the Oval Office. We've never had a chance to talk to Ms. Yates about that meeting. What do we know? We know that after the general briefing, there was a pull-aside that President Obama asked Comey and Yates to stay behind. And President Obama mentioned the fact that he was aware of an intercept between General Flynn and the Russian ambassador, Mr. Kislyak. Ms. Yates was not aware of that intercept, and she said in her 302, she was so surprised by the information she was learning that she was having a hard time processing it and listening to the conversation at the same time. The President of the United States knew about the surveillance of General Flynn talking to the Russian ambassador, but the number 2 at the Justice Department did not know. The question is, who told the President? And did they have the authority to tell the President? Did they go around Ms. Yates in the Department of Justice? If so, why? The bottom line about the January 5th meeting is to find out how the number 2 at the Department of Justice was unaware of this event. And to the public, why does this matter to you? General Flynn was the incoming National Security Advisor. The election was over. Trump had won. He had picked his team. General Flynn was going to be the National Security Advisor replacing Susan Rice. Well, what have we learned? That there were intercepts between General Flynn and Mr. Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, in December. Flynn was talking to Kislyak about Russian sanctions imposed by the Obama administration. Those conversations have been released to the public, and he was talking to the Russians about, give us a chance to come in, don't escalate now, let's see if we can work through this. Here's what's so stunning to me. There were people at the FBI considering that a violation of the Logan Act. What is the Logan Act? It is a law that was written in 1799 that prohibits American citizens, without permission from the government, talking to foreign individuals about differences in policy. So I want everybody in America to understand the way the system works. The transition team of the incoming administration should be talking to foreign leaders and representatives about how the transition will work and about policy differences. I'm going to ask every senator to think, have you called a foreign leader in your time in the Senate to express differences of concern about a particular administration policy. Have you violated the Logan Act? I consistently talk to foreign leaders about my differences with Republican and Democratic administrations. Have I violated the Logan Act? I called up the Israelis and urged them to push back against the Iran nuclear agreement because people in America will listen to you. I thought it was a bad deal. Did I violate the Logan Act? I called the Kurds and our allies in Syria, the SDF, and I asked them to rally their allies in Washington to push back against President Trump's decision to withdraw all of our forces from Syria. Did I violate the Logan Act? No. No one in history of the Department of Justice has ever been prosecuted for violating the Logan Act. Why are we having these hearings? To make sure that laws like this cannot be used as political tools to get people you don't like. And we need to clear up once and for all how the Logan Act works in America. I dare say that every incoming administration routinely has discussions with foreign leaders about policy differences and how things will be different. Ms. Yates, when she understood what was going on, was very concerned that a prosecution under the Logan Act was being contemplated. The question is, who brought up the Logan Act in the January 5th meeting? Whose great idea was this? Ms. Yates' 302 interview, where she talked about the January 5th meeting with the FBI, doesn't mention the vice president being in the meeting. But what do we now know? We know she was shocked and was having a hard time following the conversation because she was stunned that the president knew about the intercept with Flynn and Kislyak, and she did not. What have we learned? We've got an email from Susan Rice to herself on Inauguration Day, and it starts with, on January the 5th, the meeting in question, following a briefing by the IC leadership on Russian hacking during the 2016 presidential election, President Obama had a brief follow-on conversation with FBI Director Jim Comey, Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates in the Oval Office. Vice President Biden and I were also present. This is evidence coming from Susan Rice that in the January 5th meeting, the set-aside, the Vice President was there. What else have we found since we last talked to Ms. Yates? We found agents' notes from Mr. Strzok that Comey, the director of the FBI, reported to Agent Strzok, who was intricately involved in Crossfire Hurricane, and gave him a readout on the meeting. According to Agent Strzok's notes, handwritten notes, it says, VP Logan Act, President, these are unusual times, VP. I've been unintelligible on the Intel Committee for 10 years, and I've never. President, make sure you look at things and have the right people on it. President, is there anything I shouldn't be telling transition team? This is the director. Kislyak calls appear legit. Strzok is telling us that Comey told him that not only the vice president was in the January 5th set-aside meeting, it was the vice president who brought up the Logan Act. We need to find out what happened and who was there, and this is the first step in the journey. And again, why does it matter? It matters a lot to me. We have oversight of the Department of Justice here. How could it be that the number 2 in the Department of Justice not know about an investigation of the incoming National Security Advisor, and the President did? Who at the FBI, the Department of Justice, went around Ms. Yates to tell the President about the investigation? Whose idea was it to suggest that the interaction between Flynn and Kislyak was a violation of the Logan Act. If that's going to be the standard for this country, you're destroying the ability to do a transition. And to every senator in this room, we have all violated the Logan Act under that theory. Every one of us has reached out to some foreign government to show differences with the current administration. The Logan Act has never been used for a reason. I think it was used here as a sham reason to find out more about General Flynn, who the Obama administration did not like. So the bottom line is, when this is over, we need to fix it. We need to make sure going forward in the next transition, no matter who wins, that you can talk with foreign leaders without being afraid of going to jail. General Flynn wasn't talking to the Russians about, hey, pay my house off, give me money. He was talking to the Russians about, don't escalate the sanctions, fight, give us a chance to come in and we'll start over. My God, if that's a violation of the law, God help us all. And to her credit, Sally Yates did not want to go down that road. General Flynn was interviewed on January the 24th by the FBI without her permission, against her counsel. She recommended that the Department of Justice notify the current administration about the concerns they have with General Flynn, that the right thing to do would be to call McGahn and the Trump administration and tell them about the concerns they had about General Flynn. The FBI went down a different path. The FBI calls Flynn and suggests to him that you don't need a lawyer, that we just want to talk to you, we want to get it over quickly. Do you mind meeting with us? And when Flynn said, I'd like my lawyer, says, no, if you do that, we have to go way up to the chain. That will slow things down. And what did Flynn tell McCabe? Well, you've got the transcript. You know what I said. If there was a violation of the Logan Act, you had the transcript. Why did you need to talk to him? They were going to manufacture a crime, not try to figure out what he did. That's my view. We'll see if over time that matters. I'll end on this. If you had followed Mrs. Yates' advice and gone to the White House to tell them about their concerns the way you should have done it, because she said what happened with the FBI was problematic and inconsistent with what should have happened. Been a lot of heartache saved in this country. So we're going to keep pressing on to find out what happened in that January 5th meeting, and we're going to try to fix this so it never, ever happens again. Folks, I'll end with this. The Obama administration, Department of Justice, had one view of the Logan Act. The FBI had another view of the Logan Act. But the thought that the Logan Act could be used against the incoming national security advisor who was talking to the Russians about different policy, that could be used as a basis for an interview, that could be a crime, should shock us all. Because if it can happen to General Flynn, it can happen to everybody on this committee, because we do this all the time. Senator Feinstein.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As I understand this, today is the second hearing in the chairman's examination of Crossfire Hurricane. That's the FBI's investigation into Russian election interference and ties to the Trump campaign. Inspector General Horowitz confirmed after a 19-month investigation, the FBI had a legitimate basis to investigate whether the Trump campaign was involved in Russia's efforts to interfere in the 2016 election. Specifically, in late July 2016, Australian officials informed the FBI that Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos had advanced knowledge that Russia was willing to, quote, assists the Trump campaign, end quote, by anonymously releasing dirt on Clinton in the form of thousands of emails. The FBI learned this 1 week after WikiLeaks had released 20,000 emails that Russia had hacked from the computers of the Democratic National Committee. Given the circumstances, it was essential that the FBI investigate. Today's witness, former Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, has said Russia's attack on our election required both an investigation and a response. And as Inspector General Horowitz confirmed, the opening of the investigation had nothing to do with reporting from Christopher Steele, the so-called Steele dossier. That counterintelligence investigation, Crossfire Hurricane, eventually became the Mueller investigation. And former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein recently confirmed to this committee that the Steele dossier had nothing to do with the Mueller investigation either. Mueller's investigation detailed sweeping and systematic Russian interference in the 2016 election. The special counsel determined that the Russian government, quote, perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and worked to secure that outcome, end quote. The Mueller investigation uncovered more than 120 contacts between the Trump campaign and individuals linked to Russia, revealing that the Trump campaign knew about, welcomed, and expected it would benefit electorally from Russia's interference. The investigation also established that individuals associated with the Trump campaign repeatedly lied to Congress, the special counsel, and the American people to conceal their contacts with Russia. We also disagree with President Trump and his allies' claims about Michael Flynn, namely that Obama officials, including Vice President Biden, unfairly targeted Flynn in order to undermine Trump's presidency. And the facts are well known and not in dispute, but let me review them. In late December 2016, President Obama imposed sanctions to punish Russia for its unprecedented attack on our democracy. That same day, Flynn spoke several times with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. Transcripts of the calls reveal that Flynn urged Russia not to escalate matters, but to respond to U.S. sanctions in a, quote, reciprocal, end quote, or, quote, even-keeled, end quote, manner. Flynn did not express disapproval for Russia's interference in the election. Instead, he sent a clear message that the incoming administration was not interested in holding Russia accountable, a message that undermined U.S. policy. When Flynn was interviewed about his conversations with Kislyak as part of Crossfire Hurricane, he did not tell the truth. He was charged by Special Counsel Mueller and pleaded guilty twice to lying to the FBI. He stated in court under oath that his actions were wrong and that he accepted full responsibility for them. Despite Flynn's guilty pleas, this May, Attorney General Barr intervened to dismiss the case over the objection of career prosecutors. Flynn was not treated unfairly. In fact, it appears that he was granted favorable treatment by having the Justice Department seek to dismiss his case even after he admitted guilt and took responsibility for his actions. I believe this sends the wrong message. It signals that it is acceptable to lie to the FBI, and it raises legitimate questions about whether an ally of the president received special treatment. Given her involvement in the early stages of Mr. Flynn's case, I hope that our witness today, former Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates can shed additional light on why the Flynn investigation and charges were warranted. Let me just say this. The real question isn't whether the Logan Act was violated. The question is whether Flynn was acting on his own without the president-elect's knowledge or permission. If so, that was a counterintelligence problem. If, however, the incoming president did know that Flynn was talking to Kislyak, asking Russia not to overreact to U.S. sanctions, and suggesting that the incoming administration would not hold Russia accountable, then why was the incoming president not interested in holding Russia accountable for interfering in the 2016 election? I hope that we will use the investigation's findings to harden our defenses, including addressing Russia's attempts to interfere in the 2020 election and the president's unwillingness to denounce foreign interference. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. Ms. Yates is appearing here voluntarily, and I appreciate that. She had some reasons she couldn't be here in person, which I think have been accommodated and were legitimate. And we've agreed to the following, that she will answer questions within the following scope: knowledge of the events described in the DOJ OIG report entitled Review of 4 FISA applications and other aspects of FBI Crossfire Hurricane investigation, knowledge of the Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, Ms. Yates' knowledge of the investigation of General Flynn, and we'll try to honor that. I appreciate her doing this voluntarily. With that understanding, I'd like now to swear Ms. Yates in. I can't see you. Are you out there somewhere?
I think we need to see her, Mr.
Yeah, I think we do too.
I think it may be that I have to speak for
there you
it to
go.
turn.
Yeah, we see you. All right. Could you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that testimony you're about to get this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help you God? Thank you. You may make your opening statement, Ms. Yates.
Thank you. Chairman Graham, Ranking Member Feinstein, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. Now, as some of you know, I was a career prosecutor at the Department of Justice. I was honored to represent the people of the United States for over 27 years through 5 Democratic and Republican administrations. And I took very seriously my responsibility to represent the people in a manner that engendered the trust of the public I served. As you know, I've testified a number of times about the general topics of today's hearing. But as Chairman Graham just indicated, he is particularly interested in one specific subject, that being a meeting that occurred in the Oval Office on January 5th of 2017. So why don't I just go directly to that?
Maybe she could speak more loudly.
I'm sorry. I'm
Ma'am, could you speak up just a bit, a little louder, please?
Sure, I'll try. I've never been accused of being too soft-spoken, but I'll try to be louder, yes. Chairman Graham, you have indicated that you are particularly interested in the meeting that occurred in the Oval Office on January 5th, 2017. And can you all hear me okay now?
Much better.
Right, so why don't I just go directly to that? This meeting took place just 2 months after the 2016 election. And this was at a time when we were just beginning to come to terms with a foreign adversary's stunning, systematic attack on our democracy. You know, we've all heard Russian interference in our election so much that it's kind of lost its shock value. But this attack on our homeland was indeed shocking. By late December, our intelligence community had determined that Russia, acting on the direct orders of President Vladimir Putin, had engaged in a massive effort to undermine faith in our democratic processes, to hurt Hillary Clinton's chance of electability, and to aid the candidacy of now President Donald Trump. The Russian government had used cyber attacks, the strategic release of stolen information, and a coordinated campaign to weaponize social media against American citizens. This unprecedented act of aggression could not go unanswered. So on December 28th, the Obama administration took a first step by ejecting 35 suspected Russian intelligence operatives and imposing other sanctions on Russia. They did this both to punish the Russians for their attack on our democracy and, importantly, to deter them from ever doing it again. As expected, the Russians immediately announced that they would retaliate. But then the next day, they inexplicably reversed course and announced that they didn't intend to take any responsive action. The administration was understandably perplexed by this abrupt change, and President Obama asked the intel community to try to figure out what had happened. And the FBI discovered the answer. General Michael Flynn, the incoming National Security Advisor, was having back-channel discussions with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak. Recorded conversations between General Flynn and the ambassador revealed that General Flynn had essentially neutered the U.S. government's message of deterrence. Far from rebuking the Russians for their attack on our country, General Flynn was conciliatory. He tried to persuade the Russians not to escalate the situation so they could reset the relationship. The day after General Flynn's call with Kislyak, Putin himself announced that the Russians wouldn't take any action whatsoever to respond to America's sanctions. And President Trump tweeted praise of Putin's decision. In a follow-up call between Kislyak and Flynn, Kislyak advised Flynn that Moscow had made this decision, had made this course reversal as a direct result of Flynn's request. So that's what was happening in the days that led up to this January 5th meeting. On that day, the White House had the intel chiefs in to brief the president and the vice president and the national security advisor on their intelligence assessment of Russian interference. Portions of that assessment were due to be released publicly the next day. Attorney General Lynch was out of town, so I was asked to stand in her place. Following the briefing, which took place in the Oval Office, the president asked Director Comey and me to stay back with the vice president and the national security advisor. I recall that the president began the after meeting by saying something to the effect that he had learned of the calls between Kislyak and Flynn, and he didn't want to know anything anymore, and he didn't want to influence anything. But what he did want to know was whether the White House could continue to share sensitive national security information with General Flynn during the transition. Now, at this point, I didn't know why the president was asking this question, because this was the first I had heard of the calls between Flynn and Kislyak. I was really surprised, both that General Flynn had engaged in these discussions and that Director Comey knew about them, but I didn't. And so after we left the Oval Office, Director Comey and I talked in the waiting room that's there outside the Oval Office. And I was frankly irritated with Director Comey for not having told me about the calls. And I asked him why this was the first this. And he told me that his team had briefed the lawyers in the National Security Division about the calls the previous day, and he expected that the NSD lawyers would brief me. As it turned out, the National Security Division lawyers had, in fact, made an appointment already that was scheduled with me for that afternoon. Now, while I don't recall all the details of the conversation in the Oval Office, my memory is clear on the important points. The purpose of this meeting was for the president to find out whether based on the calls between Ambassador Kislyak and General Flynn, the transition team needed to be careful about what it was sharing with General Flynn. During the meeting, the President, the Vice President, and the National Security Advisor did not in any way attempt to direct or influence any kind of investigation. Something like that would have set off alarms for me, and it would have stuck out both at the time and in my memory. No such thing happened. The President was focused entirely on the national security implications of sharing sensitive intelligence information with General Flynn during the transition, a process that was obviously already underway at the White House. I will close with this. In this election year, I hope that we won't lose sight of the very real threat posed by the ongoing efforts of a foreign adversary to undermine our democratic processes, and that we will continue to proactively protect the integrity of our elections. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You mentioned shock value, that is shocking what the Russians did. I agree, we need to stop it. Did you read the Horowitz report, Ms. Yates?
I did.
Were you shocked by it?
I certainly was shocked, yes. I think that the conduct that was reflected there.
So let's talk about that conduct right quick. We're talking about using a document that came from a Russian subsource to get a warrant against an American citizen repeatedly that was full of garbage. Does that bother you?
Well, I'm not sure that I
Does it
agree
bother
with
you
your
that the
characterization.
FISA court rebuked the Department of Justice and the FBI regarding the Carter Page warrant application?
Senator, I believe that the Department of Justice and the FBI have a duty of candor with the FISA court. That
Do you
was
believe
not
they
met.
fulfilled that duty?
No, I do not believe that they did. I think that there were.
As a matter of
errors
fact,
and
you
abuses
signed that
were-
warrant application in October and January. Is that correct?
That's right.
Knowing then what you know now, would you sign that application?
Senator, I would never sign any document.
So I
in
take
any
that to
matter
be
that
no,
exists.
because that document was a fraud. Is that a fair statement? If you knew then what you know now, you wouldn't have signed it?
I wouldn't sign anything that I knew to contain errors or omissions.
Well, did that contain errors and omissions?
Did, and I would never knowingly sign a document.
Right.
I didn't do that in the 27 years.
I
was
believe you
speaking.
didn't know. I believe you didn't know that what you signed was wrong. The question is, if you had known, you wouldn't have signed it. Is that correct?
No, if I had known that it contained incorrect information, I certainly wouldn't have signed it.
Thank you. And do you agree with me it did contain incorrect information?
I know that now based on the Horowitz report.
That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not saying that you lied to the court. I'm saying you signed something that was a lie and you didn't know it. Now let's talk about the January 5th meeting. Was the Vice President there?
Yes, he was.
Okay. Did he mention the Logan Act?
You know, I don't remember the Vice President saying much of anything in this meeting.
So you don't remember him mentioning the Logan Act?
No, I don't.
Did anybody mention the Logan Act?
I have a vague memory of Director Comey mentioning the Logan Act.
Okay,
But
what
I'm
was he
not
mentioning
sure.
the Logan
Can I
Act
think-
about? In what context?
Well, I'm not sure if he mentioned that in the Oval Office meeting or in the meeting that
What
he
do you
and I
think
had.
about the-
Mr. Chairman, let her answer the question. Just because it's a woman testifying doesn't mean she has to be cut off.
Yeah,
on
thanks
every
a
answer.
lot, Senator Lee. I really appreciate that. You're very constructive. So here's my question. Was the Logan Act mentioned in the meeting?
I recall Director Comey mentioning it at some point. What I'm not sure about, Senator Graham, and I want to be
That's fair.
absolutely certain.
That's fair. You don't know if it's mentioned in the meeting or not. Do you believe
No,
the
I do recall Director Comey mentioning it at some point. I'm not sure. It
Right.
was in
No,
the
I got
meeting.
you. I got
Or
you.
in the discussion he and I had.
No, I got you.
That's all I'm trying to say.
Here's the question. Did General Kislak's behavior amount to a violation of the Logan Act, in your opinion?
It certainly could have been a technical violation, but that was not the focus of the FBI or us. That we were really focused on a counterintelligence investigation.
Well, Do you realize on January the 4th, the FBI recommended to drop General Flynn from Crossfire Hurricane?
I understand. Well, I know that now. I didn't know that at the time.
But here's my point, Ms.
I also
Yates.
believe that
On January the 4th, the FBI said there's no reason to keep looking at General Flynn. On January the 5th, you have a meeting with the FBI director where you believe he mentions the Logan Act in regard to General Flynn. Is that correct?
What I understand, Senator Graham, is that, and I didn't know at the time because I wasn't privy to the FBI's internal documentation of the counterintelligence investigation.
Did you even know what was going on?
Not specifically with respect to General Flynn, no.
So you did not know the FBI had a counterintelligence investigation of General Flynn?
No, I did not until.
So here's my